Let's talk about the filth that's starting to come out in the early days of the Diddy trial. This, of course, is P. Diddy. Surprise, surprise, he's a creep. Surprise, surprise, he's done horrible things.
Moved to New York City, and I lived with Sean Puffy Combs for a year.
That's the crazy thing.
Usher's presence in the courtroom that day was a spectacle unto itself, a moment so charged with tension it felt like time stopped. Here was one of the most celebrated artists of his generation, a man whose voice had serenaded millions, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of a courtroom to recount the darkest chapter of his life. No stage, no adoring fans, no spotlight to soften the edges, just the unrelenting weight of what he had to say. It was a moment years in the making, but no one, least of all Usher himself, could have predicted the devastating revelations that were about to unfold.
Look at Diddy, for instance. Let's take a look at him. Let's take a look at, he has videos. He has videos of the parties. Now, what I've heard, which I don't know how much of it is in mainstream media, I don't really follow the story that much, but what I've heard from friends that are attorneys, friends of mine, that have represented me before, agents and so on, is there's a bidding war going on.
To understand the gravity of Usher's testimony, you have to rewind the clock to the early 90s. Usher Raymond was barely a teenager when he was sent to live with Sean Diddy Combs, a man already infamous for his brash attitude and larger-than-life lifestyle. Usher had just been signed to LaFace Records, but his label head, L.A. Reid, wasn't sure how to market the young star. The decision to send Usher to Combs wasn't just a business move. It was a calculated risk, an attempt to inject the teen with the kind of swagger and edge that Combs seemed to embody effortlessly. For Usher, it was supposed to be a masterclass in stardom. What it became was something far more sinister. Living with Combs, Usher quickly realized was like stepping into another world. This wasn't just mentorship, it was immersion into an environment where excess wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. Combs' sprawling New York mansion was notorious in the industry, a place whispered about in hushed tones for years. It wasn't just a home, it was a revolving door of celebrities, models, and industry players, all drawn into the orbit of Combs' magnetic but overpowering personality. What Usher described in his testimony painted a vivid picture of a young boy thrust into a world he wasn't remotely prepared for, lavish parties that stretched into the early hours, rooms filled with people whose behavior defied explanation, and an atmosphere that was equal parts intoxicating and suffocating.
Right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Yeah, but you were 13. What were you seeing?
I went there to see the lifestyle.
Usher didn't hold back as he detailed what it was like to be the only child in a house that seemed custom-built for chaos. The parties were relentless, their intensity amplified by the constant presence of high-profile guests and the unspoken rules that governed the space. It wasn't just the scale of the events that overwhelmed him. It was the complete lack of boundaries. Doors that should have remained closed were flung wide open, revealing things no teenager should have to see. Usher described wandering the hallways late at night, his curiosity often leading him to scenes he couldn't fully comprehend at the time. What lingered, though, was the feeling, an oppressive sense that he was in a place where normal rules didn't apply, where power dynamics were skewed, and where Combs was the unquestionable ruler. What made Usher's testimony so devastating wasn't just the details of what he saw, but the emotional toll it clearly took on him. He spoke of the confusion and fear he felt as a teenager, emotions he buried for years under the veneer of professionalism and gratitude for what Combs had done for his career. But as Usher described it, the gratitude was complicated. Yes, Combs had opened doors for him, introducing him to industry legends like Mary J. Blige and the notorious B.I.G., but the cost of that access was immeasurable. Usher described feeling trapped, caught between the opportunity of a lifetime and an environment that left him questioning everything he thought he knew about right and wrong.
What'd they do to him? Because there's a lot of speculation out there, but nobody, I've heard things, but what did they really do to him?
The courtroom was silent as Usher recounted specific moments that had haunted him for years. He spoke about how the lines between mentorship and manipulation often blurred, how Combs' charisma could flip into something far darker in the blink of an eye. Usher described moments of intense pressure, instances where he felt his loyalty was being tested in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't just about following orders or being a good protege. It was about submission, about proving time and again that he was willing to play by Combs' rules, no matter how much they violated his own sense of morality. Perhaps the most chilling part of Usher's testimony was the way he described the atmosphere of Combs' mansion. It was a house of contradictions, a place where luxury and excess masked an undercurrent of tension and fear. Usher spoke about how everyone in Combs' orbit seemed to walk on eggshells, hyper-aware of the mogul's moods and whims. The power dynamics were unmistakable. Combs held all the cards, and everyone else was there at his discretion. Usher recalled moments when he saw others in Combs' circle fall out of favor, their sudden absence from the house a brutal reminder of how quickly things could change. It was a world where loyalty wasn't just expected, it was demanded, and the price of disobedience was steep.
I hate to say that. I hate to say that because I really like Justin Bieber. I feel bad for Justin Bieber. And this is when that happened.
Usher's testimony also touched on the psychological toll of living in such an environment. He described how he often felt isolated despite being surrounded by people. As the youngest person in the house, he didn't have anyone to confide in, anyone who could help him make sense of what he was experiencing. He spoke about how he learned to compartmentalize his feelings, to push down his discomfort and confusion in order to survive. But even as he tried to adapt, the cracks began to show. Usher admitted that there were moments when he questioned whether he could continue, whether the price of success was worth the personal cost. What made Usher's revelations even more damning was how they connected to the larger narrative surrounding Combs. The mogul's empire had always thrived on the image of excess and invincibility, but Usher's testimony painted a starkly different picture. This wasn't just about one man's behavior. It was about a culture that allowed that behavior to flourish unchecked. Usher's experiences weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger pattern, one that had been whispered about for years, but rarely spoken of in public. His testimony wasn't just an indictment of Combs, it was an indictment of an industry that had turned a blind eye for far too long.
Sure, Justin Bieber has been getting this out in different ways. You could see it in his music and just what he's been trying to say.
As Usher stepped down from the stand, the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but the sense of shock was unmistakable. Usher had peeled back the curtain on a world that most people only see through the glossy lens of music videos and red carpet appearances. He had shown the cracks in the foundation, the darkness that lurked behind the bright lights and designer suits, but even as he left the stand, one question loomed larger than ever. If this was what Usher had experienced, what else was hiding in the shadows of Sean Diddy Combs' empire? The answers, it seemed, were just beginning to surface, but Usher's testimony was only the crack in the dam, the first real breach in a wall of silence that had stood for decades. The deeper you look, the more you realize that this wasn't just one man's story. It was the tip of an iceberg so massive it threatened to sink everyone tethered to it. Because Usher wasn't alone, far from it. His account was just one piece of a much darker, much broader puzzle. As the courtroom revelations spilled over into the public consciousness, more and more voices began to emerge, each one echoing a chillingly similar refrain. Sean Diddy Combs had built his empire on a foundation of control, manipulation, and fear.
We'll take Justin Bieber. A grown man take Justin Bieber when he was young to a vacation, a romantic vacation, showing pictures on
Take Justin Bieber, for instance, a name that, on its own, carries enough weight to make headlines. What had once been a seemingly innocent mentorship between an established mogul and a rising star now reeked of something far more complicated. The resurfaced stories about Bieber's time under Combs' watch are enough to make your stomach turn. A then 15-year-old Bieber was whisked into Combs' world, paraded around like a trophy, and exposed to a lifestyle most adults wouldn't know how to handle, let alone a teenager on the brink of global fame. Photos and videos from that time, which once seemed harmless, now feel unsettling in their context. Lavish cars, private jets, and cryptic remarks about adventures that were never fully explained. What was once brushed off as youthful camaraderie has now taken on a sinister edge, with allegations suggesting that Bieber, too, may have been another pawn in Combs' game. But Bieber's story isn't just about surface-level discomfort. It's about the alleged grooming of a young star for a world he had no way of navigating. Reports have emerged suggesting that Combs would isolate Bieber during these so-called mentorship periods, allegedly keeping him away from his usual support systems like his family and early management team. It's said that Bieber was encouraged to idolize Combs, not just professionally, but personally, as though being part of Combs' inner circle was the ultimate validation of his worth. Insiders now claim that this dynamic wasn't mentorship at all. It was control, an intense psychological pressure to conform to Combs' lifestyle and expectations, no matter how overwhelming or inappropriate it might have been for someone so young.
They took Justin Bieber, and just him, that only is a bad look, it's sad.
And the most unsettling part, Bieber wasn't even the first. This pattern of behavior where Combs allegedly took young talents under his wing only to mold them in his image has been whispered about for years. Before Bieber, there was a string of other rising stars who experienced similar treatment. Some walked away quietly, their careers mysteriously stalling afterward. Others, like Usher, held their silence for decades before finally speaking out. What's becoming clear now is that these weren't isolated cases. They were part of a larger, more calculated system. Combs wasn't just mentoring these young talents. He was allegedly embedding them into a world where his influence was absolute, where questioning him meant risking everything. Adding to the discomfort are the cryptic remarks from those who orbited Combs during this time. A resurfaced clip from a TV interview shows Combs and Bieber in a lighthearted exchange about their time together, with Combs jokingly telling Bieber not to talk about what we do together. At the time, it was played off as banter, a throwaway comment meant to entertain. But in hindsight, that moment feels loaded with implications. A glimpse into a dynamic that at best was troubling and, at worst, deeply exploitative. It's a reminder that the lines between mentorship and manipulation can sometimes blur in ways that are hard to see until it's too late.
To not be involved with a famous singer, to not come out, here's the price. And that they're just selling to the individuals that are in those. This is what I heard. They're selling those videos. So if you're Tommy X, and Tommy X is a big, big movie star, and he was at some of the Diddy parties, he was in one of those bedrooms with 3 other men, and he's happily married to a woman, and blah. Tommy doesn't want that video to come out.
And then there's the question of who knew, because someone had to. Bieber wasn't an unknown when he crossed paths with Combs. He was already on the fast track to global stardom. His management team, his label, his family. How did none of them intervene? Or perhaps more disturbingly, were they complicit? Did they see the red flags but choose to stay silent because the association with Combs was too valuable to jeopardize? This isn't just a story about one man's alleged actions. It's about the ecosystem that allowed it to happen. The people who stood by and watched as young talents were drawn into a world they were unprepared for. With every new revelation, the spotlight widens, implicating not just Combs, but an entire network of enablers and bystanders. And if Bieber's involvement wasn't alarming enough, the whispers surrounding other high-profile protégés only add fuel to the fire. Combs' reputation as a kingmaker, someone who could pluck talent from obscurity and mold them into superstars, had always been his calling card. But what's becoming increasingly clear is that this power came with strings attached. Strings that, once pulled, left those in his orbit tangled in a web they couldn't escape. Former collaborators and employees have started to speak out, detailing an environment where loyalty was demanded and dissent was punished. Contracts were allegedly used as tools of control, locking people into deals that benefited no one but Combs himself. Promises of stardom came with unspoken conditions, and those who failed to comply found themselves cast out, their careers derailed before they had a chance to begin.
Same thing for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the interesting thing about the Epstein and the theory about Epstein is we know he filmed people for sure on that island. He has a lot of movies, a lot of films of people that are very, very powerful political figures, and entertainers, business people. So, do you really believe that Jeffrey Epstein himself? And
of course not.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And then there's the matter of the so-called blackmail files. Multiple sources have hinted at the existence of a treasure trove of compromising material allegedly collected by Combs over the years. Whether it's photos, videos, or recorded conversations, the implication is clear. These were not just keepsakes, but weapons, tools for maintaining power and ensuring silence. The idea that a man as influential as Combs might have built a secret arsenal of leverage against those around him is both shocking and entirely plausible. After all, how else could someone maintain such an iron grip on an industry known for its ever-shifting allegiances? The mere suggestion of these files has sent shockwaves through Hollywood and the music world, with many wondering just how deep the rabbit hole goes. But the most damning part of all this isn't just the alleged actions themselves, it's the culture that allowed them to happen. For years, the music industry has operated under an unspoken code of silence, a don't ask, don't tell mentality that protected its biggest players at the expense of everyone else. Combs wasn't just a participant in this system, he was one of its architects. The parties, the deals, the whispered threats. It all painted a picture of an ecosystem where power was hoarded at the top and those at the bottom were left to fend for themselves. And the more you dig, the more you realize that this wasn't just about Combs. It was about an entire industry complicit in its own rot, too afraid or too greedy to confront the truth.
Did you ever spend time with the guy? Did you ever meet Diddy?
I've met him before, yeah.
How was he?
Very nice guy, very smart, super business. I mean, he's very successful.
And yet, for all the allegations, for all the stories beginning to surface, one thing remains painfully unclear. How is this allowed to go on for so long? It's not as though the signs weren't there. Stories about Combs' behavior have been circulating for years, whispered about in back rooms and hinted at in interviews. But it wasn't until now, with the weight of Usher's testimony and the growing list of accusers, that the floodgates have truly opened. And as they do, the fallout is proving to be far-reaching. Deals are being scrutinized, partnerships are being dissolved, and former allies are scrambling to distance themselves from the man they once celebrated. The empire that Combs spent decades building is crumbling, and it's taking everyone in its orbit down with it. Still, for all the revelations, there's a sense that we've only scratched the surface. The accounts we've heard so far are harrowing, yes, but they're also incomplete. What about the people who haven't come forward yet? The ones still too afraid to speak out? How many more stories are out there waiting to be told? And perhaps most importantly, what will it take for the industry to finally reckon with the culture that allowed this to happen? These are questions that remain unanswered. But one thing is certain. The story of Sean Diddy Combs is far from over.
I'll tell you, I don't know how much, I don't like to say things that I know unless I see it. That there's a little difference, but was it discussed? Was there descriptions from people I know that were at those? Yes, but here's another thing. So how many of these big entertainment parties and over the years and everything with as successful as you are, have you been around? Does anyone ever come up to you at a certain hour and say, okay, it's time to go? At those parties, they did.
So what do you think? Are these the cracks in the foundation of a long-standing empire, or is this just the beginning of something even bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and as always, stay tuned, because this story is only getting started.